As any industry hack will tell you, the heyday of New Zealand's tabloid press was back in the 1970s. Back then, The Truth, the Sunday News and the now-defunct 8 O'Clock sold hundreds of thousands of copies and titillated readers with all manner of sleaze. When we think of tabloid, we tend to think of the British press, The Sun, the Page 3 girls, the humorous headlines. It's not that we don't have tabloid. The Sunday News, The Truth and the Women's Mags, or Hags Rags as they're known in the trade, but the heyday is certainly over. Back in the 70s and 80s, the 8 O'Clock, The Truth and the Sunday News were huge sellers. The Truth might be a minnow now, but it used to be one of our biggest selling publications, with its heady mix of divorce notices and scandal. It famously outed Marilyn Waring and Colin Moyle, defamed Ray Columbus, had a crack at Brian Edwards, and even supported the Springbok tour. Back then, we even had our own tabloid journo stars, people like John Justice.
I remember one occasion I was at a pub, as we are now, and I was doing what all men do at the pub, and they'd say, "G'day, mate," to the guy next to the guy at the urinal, going, "Yeah, how you doing? Yeah, all right." And he says, this guy turns to me and says, "You John Justice?" And I went, "Don't know what you're talking about." Sphincter muscle was very, very strong, stopped in mid-flow and hurtled out the pub.
Justice was a consumer watchdog warrior. He was the tabloid journo star of the 80s. Was it frightening sometimes?
Yeah, there were times when it was a bit frightening, because you'd often go into situations where you were confronting people who didn't want to talk to you, and some of the people you were confronting were quite aggressive. So yeah, there was times, and I mean, it certainly wasn't intimidating, so I made up with it by just utter brashness.
Did you get death threats?
Yeah, a couple of times, several times. You get phone calls, you know, like, remember one guy rang up and he says, "When you leave the office tonight, there's a knife in your back." And I says, "Well, thanks very much." And the John Justice stuff, I would record a lot on the tape recorder. I would run a little tape recorder inside my jacket and not tell anybody and go and talk to them. I think this probably breaches God knows how many ethical rules, but...
You could do that in those days?
Well, yeah, I had no problem with it, you know. I remember one case I was dealing with a person who ran a panel beating firm, and he'd had a man's car in the panel beating shop for a long period of time. But when the man got the car out of the shop, the door sill fell off, you know, and it was stuffed with newspaper. And so it'd been bogged up and stuffed with newspaper. And the panel beater guy said, "Well, look, it wasn't us, it wasn't us." I said, "Well, when was the car in there?" He says, "I was in from such and such a date to such and such a date." He says, "It's in the records." I says, "Oh, that's good." I says, "Because the date on the newspaper fits right in the middle of that." He went, "Oh."
So why did the tabloid press peak and fizzle out in the 1980s? Just ask seasoned tabloid practitioner Alan Young.
I'll tell you what I think the main reason is political correctness. Finger waggers, wowsers and woe persons that know what's best for us. We would never ever use those now. The exclamation points.
Oh, exclamation point.
Yeah, look, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's every story on this page, and then boom, the lead. Oh, man. It's overkill.
Chris Baldock is the new hope of tabloid in New Zealand. Recently appointed editor of the Sunday News, this brash little pom is already beginning to make his mark.
Oh, sorry, I was walking straight to the fracking camera. I think the tabloids in the UK, you know, it's, do the old footballer thing, shoot often enough and you score. And they're not afraid about who they upset, you know. I mean, if you upset David Beckham, you can move on to Michael Owen or whoever, who's the next big thing on the football scene or the next big showbiz star. I think the difference here, you know, you've got to tread a bit more carefully. It's a smaller market. You know, you don't want to upset too many people along the way.
But in Baldock's book, cricket star Simon Doull was fair game.
You know, this guy played sport for 20 years, great guy, blah-de-blah-de-blah. But he's not necessarily a great guy if he does the dirty on his wife, in my book. And if he wants to talk to women's mags about stories, then I think he's fair game, as we kind of said before. But, you know, the funny thing about that wasn't so much about the facts of the story, it was the kind of picture we'd used with it, and we're accused of making the guy look like a clown. Well, I'm sorry, you know, it's luck of the draw.
Have you ever run a story that you knew wasn't 100% true?
You put me on the spot there, and we're in the business of selling a product, you know, and you get the odd days and weeks where, you know, the things are looking a bit bleak on the story front, and you might, you know, spin something up. That is not something I would want to encourage.
But back when Alan Young was cutting his tabloid teeth in Australia, the truth was sometimes in short supply.
The practice of wife-swapping and witchcraft is spreading through Melbourne like an evil malignancy. Well, I was in the room when that story was being prepared for publication. And it was on a sheet of paper that said, the practice of wife-swapping and witchcraft is spreading through Sydney like an evil malignancy. And the preparation for the paper. This week, Sunday Post investigated what was going on. The investigation consisted of going through the story and changing the Sydney and New South Wales place names to Melbourne and Victorian place names. Now, I actually suspect that, that it wasn't originally Sydney either. Now, so you asked before about, you know, publishing stuff that's not true. This is total bullshit. There's not a word of truth in it.
I used to interview a woman called Doris Stokes, who was a spiritualist, and she wrote books called Voices in My Ear. And when things were a bit slow, I used to sort of pop along and see Doris, and she says, one week, she says, oh, I've been talking to Elvis. I says, oh, have you? She says, well, what's Elvis been talking about? She says, oh, he tells me he's really upset with Colonel Tom, and you know, it was a bad relationship, and rah, 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 rah. I says, oh, that sounds quite good. So I went back to the newspaper and I told my boss, and he says, oh, write it up. They ran it, I think, the headline was, Elvis speaks to Doris Stokes.
What's your dream story?
Ah, crikey, now you put me on the spot, haven't you? Might have to involve a certain church leader, destiny church leader, I don't know if I can say that. Yeah, no, that'd be a good starting point, wouldn't it? Maybe, you know, Brian Tamaki moves in with Michael Barrymore. Adopt child born to P-dealing former K Road prostitute. That would be a good start, wouldn't it? You know, I think that's got all the kind of tabloid elements. I don't know what the headline would be. It'd be a bit of a complicated one. You know, it'd be something like Tamaki's Bit of All White.
The woman, who had been listening to Leighton Smith at the time of the accident, said he made a very good point about solo mums, and countered that young chap with the lisp who rang up by pointing out that we'd all be speaking Japanese if it wasn't for the Americans.
Still to come, a freedom fighter in the bitter war against the Taliban of talkback, and Holmes gets a makeover.